Amelia Carter never imagined herself in the rain-soaked city of Portland, Oregon, working long hours behind a desk calculating loads for steel bridges. Growing up in sunny Santa Monica, she had always seen herself surrounded by the clear skies and sunlit beaches that represented freedom and possibility. Yet, here she was, in a city where rain wasn't just a weather forecast, it was a way of life. She had moved to Portland 3 years ago, chasing a promising engineering job after her graduation from Stanford University. Amelia's life, meticulously planned and ordered, was now in a city that refused to follow the same blueprint. The endless rain, the fog that hung over the streets like a thick blanket, the gray skies, it all felt like the constant buzz of a city perpetually waiting for the sun to break through. But the sun never seemed to arrive. From her third-floor apartment, Amelia looked out at the rain-slicked streets below, the streetlights glowing with an amber hue as droplets cascaded down the windows. The faint tapping of the rain against her glass became a constant soundtrack to her life. It was comforting in a way. The sound was reliable, just like the precise calculations she made for her bridges. But there was a hollowness behind the comfort. Despite the constant rhythm of her work in the rain, Amelia felt more lost than she had ever felt before. Her life was built on structure, on certainty, but something was missing, a sense of connection, perhaps, or the familiar warmth of family. Growing up in Santa Monica, everything had been perfect. Amelia had always done what was expected of her. She had excelled in school, followed the right career path, and made the right choices. But despite all of it, she felt the heavy weight of expectations from her parents, Richard and Linda, who had always prioritized the family name above all else. Her parents were the epitome of success in the eyes of their community. Richard, a respected investment banker, wore tailored suits even on casual days, always impeccably dressed, always in control. His every movement, every word, was calculated. Linda, a successful psychologist, maintained an air of elegance, often speaking in soft, precise tones. But beneath their polished facades was an unspoken rule that defined their family: perfection. The Blake family always had to appear flawless. No messes, no flaws, no mistakes. The family name comes first, Linda would often remind her, her voice like silk, but cold like a blade. Amelia had followed the rules. She was the perfect daughter, never raising any concerns or rocking the boat. But her younger brother, Jason, had always been the one to do just that. He was the wild card, the dreamer. Jason didn't care much for the family's obsession with perfection. He had a talent for writing, and though he had initially studied business, he eventually dropped out to pursue a career as a writer. He had always been the heart of the family, sensitive, creative, and impulsive. Jason had married Natalie, a talented but free-spirited artist from Los Angeles. They had 2 young boys, Oliver and Eli, and Amelia was convinced that their family was perfect in its own way. Jason had always made the unpredictable look so effortless. He and Natalie seemed to have the perfect balance, each complementing the other in ways that made Amelia admire them. Yet, as time went on, cracks began to show in their seemingly perfect lives. When Jason called her late one night, his voice hoarse and panicked, Amelia knew that everything was about to change. "Amelia," Jason said, his voice breaking. "It's over. She left. She's with someone else. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know what to do. My whole life is falling apart." Jason's words were a dagger to her heart. Natalie, the woman who had seemed to hold their little family together, had left him for someone else. He was lost, heartbroken, unable to make sense of it all. The weight of responsibility fell on Amelia. She had always been the reliable one, the one who could handle the hard stuff, the one who had always been there for him. She packed her bags without a second thought. With her own life in turmoil, she knew that this was her chance to be there for Jason, the brother who had always been her closest friend, even if they hadn't always agreed on everything. She drove the 2 hours from Portland to Santa Monica without stopping, the wheels of her car slicing through the wet streets like a metronome, steady, reliable, but with an underlying sense of unease. When she arrived, the house that once symbolized family perfection now seemed cold and lifeless. The door that once welcomed her with warmth now stood silent, as if it too had given up on the idealized vision of family they had worked so hard to maintain. Jason was sitting in the living room, his head in his hands. His once vibrant eyes were hollow and broken. The house felt suffocating, the air thick with regret. "I don't know what to do," he whispered, as he stood up and embraced his sister. "I thought we had everything. I thought I had everything. Now, I have nothing." Amelia didn't have the words to console him. She had never been one for comforting words, but her presence, calm and steady, was all Jason needed. She placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling his body shudder with the weight of his grief. "You don't have to go through this alone," she said softly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You're not alone. I'm here for you, Jason. Always." For the first time in months, Jason finally allowed himself to cry. He had spent so much time hiding behind his words, hiding behind the image of the carefree man who had everything together. But now, in the presence of his sister, he could no longer maintain the facade. Amelia had always been the rock in their family, but she realized that, in this moment, she was the one who needed to be strong for Jason. It was a small step, but it marked the beginning of a new chapter. Amelia had always been the one to follow the rules, to create the blueprint for her life. But now, standing by her brother, she realized that sometimes life doesn't follow the blueprint at all. It was messy, unpredictable, and raw. As Jason's sobs echoed through the house, Amelia vowed that she would help him rebuild, piece by piece. No more pretending, no more hiding. They were both broken in different ways, but together, they could find their way through the storm. The following days in Santa Monica were a blur of late nights and emotional chaos. Jason spent most of his time staring out the window, lost in thoughts of his crumbling marriage. His children, Oliver and Eli, were too young to understand the full weight of what had happened, but the emotional toll on their father was evident. The once happy household had turned into a quiet, sorrow-filled shell of its former self. Amelia couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt as she watched Jason struggle. She had come to help, to be the solid ground he could rely on, but she hadn't anticipated how deeply the emotional burden would affect her. Every time she tried to step in, to offer advice or even a listening ear, she found herself questioning her own life choices. The cracks in her own marriage, the strain of her routine, and the weight of expectations from her parents loomed over her like an ever-present shadow. Despite the emotional toll, Amelia refused to leave Jason's side. She took over the daily chores, organizing their routine, and trying to create some semblance of stability for the children. But beneath her calm exterior, Amelia was fighting a silent battle. The silent phone calls from Ben, her husband, went unanswered. Their marriage, like Jason's, was slipping through her fingers, and Amelia wasn't sure how much longer she could keep up the facade of control. One evening, as Jason was sitting at the dining table, drafting what seemed like endless notes for a project he was working on, Amelia noticed the vacant look in his eyes. His words were fragmented, as if he was lost in a sea of self-doubt. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was supposed to be the one who kept it all together. Now look at me." Amelia sat beside him, her hand gently resting on his. "You don't have to be perfect, Jason," she said softly, trying to find the right words to comfort him. "None of us are. We're all just figuring it out as we go." But Jason was too far gone in his own mind to hear her words. "I ruined everything," he continued, his voice cracking. "I should have seen it coming. I should have done something before it all fell apart." Amelia hated hearing her brother speak like this. She had always admired his boldness, his creativity, and his ability to think outside the box. But now, he was nothing more than a man broken by the weight of his mistakes. "I don't know how to fix this," he said, looking up at her with tired eyes. "I feel like I've failed my kids. I've failed you. I've failed everything." The words hit Amelia like a punch to the gut. She had never seen Jason like this before. She had always seen him as the strong, free-spirited brother who could overcome anything, but now he was crumbling before her eyes. "You haven't failed anyone," Amelia replied firmly. "We all make mistakes, Jason. What matters is what we do next. You don't have to face this alone." That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Amelia found herself sitting by the window, staring out at the rain. The soft patter of droplets against the glass seemed to mirror the emotions swirling inside her. She had come here to help Jason, but in doing so, she had neglected her own needs, her own marriage, and her own life. Ben's words from their last argument echoed in her mind. "You're here all the time, taking care of your brother and his kids. What about our future?" She had no answers for Ben. She didn't know what the future held for her marriage or for herself. All she knew was that she couldn't abandon Jason, not after everything he had been through. But was that enough? Was it enough to hold together a broken family while her own was slipping away? Amelia's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Jason walking into the room. He had a look on his face that Amelia hadn't seen in a while, determination, or maybe a glimpse of hope. "I think I need to do something," Jason said, his voice steady. "I've been writing these notes, and I think they could be more than just scribbles on paper." Amelia looked up, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Jason sat beside her, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I think I've started to write something. A story of sorts." It's about everything about what happened with Natalie, with the kids, with all of us. But it's also about how I'm trying to figure it out, trying to rebuild. For the first time in a long while, Jason's eyes weren't filled with self-doubt. There was a fire there, something that Amelia hadn't seen in him since before everything fell apart. "That sounds like a good idea," she said, offering him an encouraging smile. "I think it'll help. Writing can be cathartic." Jason nodded. "I think I need to get it all out. Maybe it'll help me make sense of things." Amelia leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment to breathe. Maybe this was the turning point for Jason, for her, and for their family. Writing had always been Jason's escape, his way of making sense of the world. Perhaps this was the way forward, the first step in rebuilding his life. "I'll help you, Jason," Amelia said quietly. "Whatever you need." Jason looked at her, his expression softening. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Amelia." Amelia smiled, but the weight of her own unresolved struggles still hung heavy in the room. "We're family. You don't have to do this alone." As Jason began to write, Amelia sat beside him, feeling a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. For the first time in weeks, there was a sense of direction in their lives. But Amelia knew that rebuilding wasn't easy. It would take time, effort, and a lot of painful honesty. Outside, the rain continued to fall, as relentless and constant as ever. But for the first time, in a long time, Amelia felt like she might be able to weather this storm with her brother by her side. The days that followed were filled with a quiet tension. Jason, though still deeply hurt, had started to find solace in his writing. It wasn't much, just fragmented thoughts and reflections. But it was something. Amelia observed him closely, sensing a slight shift in him. He was no longer just a broken man consumed by the weight of betrayal. He was slowly starting to rebuild, piece by piece, word by word. Amelia, on the other hand, found herself stuck between two worlds. She had been the perfect daughter, the responsible one. But now, her life was in disarray. Her marriage to Ben had always been one of mutual respect, but the cracks were becoming more and more visible. Ben hadn't said it outright, but his silence spoke volumes. The distance between them had grown, and every time Amelia tried to talk, he would either shut down or become defensive. It wasn't long before their conversations turned into arguments, and Amelia knew, deep down, that they were drifting further apart. She had tried to reach him, but it was as though he wasn't there anymore. She didn't blame him entirely. She had thrown herself into Jason's troubles, and in doing so, neglected her own marriage. The nights she spent comforting Jason, helping him with the kids, and listening to his broken heart had taken a toll on her. There was nothing left for Ben. He had tried to express his frustration, but Amelia had no answers. She didn't know how to fix things between them when her own world felt like it was falling apart. One evening, after dinner, Amelia found herself standing by the window, staring out at the rain. The soft sound of raindrops hitting the glass seemed to mirror the turmoil inside her. She felt the weight of her decisions, the decisions that had led her here, in this place, with her brother and his children, but also the weight of the choices she had made that had left her marriage hanging by a thread. "Amelia, are you okay?" Jason's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, his face etched with concern. "I'm fine," she replied, offering a weak smile. "Just thinking." Jason stepped closer, his gaze softening. "You've been thinking about Ben, haven't you?" Amelia didn't respond immediately. The truth was, she hadn't been able to stop thinking about him, about the way their lives had become a series of disconnected moments, where they used to be so in tune with each other. She had been so consumed with Jason's pain that she hadn't seen the damage accumulating in her own life. "Amelia," Jason said gently, "you can't fix everything. Not for me, not for Ben. You need to take care of yourself, too." His words hit her harder than she expected. For so long, she had focused on fixing Jason's broken pieces that she had forgotten about her own. Jason wasn't the only one who needed healing. She needed it, too. The following day, Amelia finally called Ben. It was awkward at first. The phone rang several times before he picked up, his voice distant and formal. "Amelia," Ben said, his tone cool. "I was wondering when you'd call." "I've been thinking a lot," she replied, her voice steady but unsure. "About us. About everything. We need to talk." There was a long pause before Ben spoke again, his voice tinged with frustration. "I've been trying to talk to you for months, Amelia. But you've been so caught up in your brother's mess that you haven't had time for me. I get it, he's family, and I'm not. But this isn't working anymore." Amelia's heart sank. She had feared this moment for a while. The truth was, she hadn't given Ben the attention he deserved. She had been so wrapped up in Jason's problems that she had ignored her own life, her own relationship. "I know," she whispered. "I've neglected you, Ben. I'm sorry. I've been so focused on helping Jason that I didn't realize how much I was losing you in the process." There was another pause, this time longer. Finally, Ben spoke, his voice softer now. "Amelia, I don't want to fight, but I need to know if we can fix this. I need to know if there's still something left between us." The question lingered in the air, unanswered. Amelia wanted to say something, to tell him everything would be fine, but the truth was, she didn't know. She had spent so long taking care of others that she had neglected herself, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to focus on her own healing too. "Ben," she said quietly, "I don't know, but I think we need some space. I can't keep living like this, torn between everyone else's problems. I need to find myself again." There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Ben sighed. "I understand, Amelia. Take the time you need. Just let me know when you figure it out." The call ended, leaving Amelia with a feeling of emptiness. It wasn't the closure she had hoped for, but at least it was the truth. She couldn't fix everything. She couldn't hold on to her marriage while sacrificing herself in the process. That night, as Jason sat beside her, reading through his latest manuscript, Amelia made a decision. She would help Jason finish the book. She would be there for him, but she also had to start focusing on herself, on finding her own path. She couldn't fix her marriage overnight, but maybe, just maybe, she could start by taking care of herself first. "I think it's good," Amelia said, looking at the pages Jason had written. "You're doing the right thing. This is how you heal." Jason looked up, his eyes still heavy with the weight of his emotions. "I don't know if I'll ever fully heal, but writing is helping, and I'm starting to see the light again." Amelia smiled, but there was a quiet sadness in her eyes. "We'll both find the light, Jason. In time." As the rain continued to fall, Amelia realized that she couldn't control the storms of life, but she could learn how to navigate through them, and maybe, just maybe, rebuild what had been lost. As the weeks passed, life in the Santa Monica house began to take a more predictable rhythm. Jason's writing had become his anchor, but Amelia knew it wasn't enough to fill the empty spaces. The constant rain outside, though calming to some, seemed endless, like an eternal metaphor for the weight they both carried. But as the days turned into weeks, there was a noticeable change, a subtle shift in Jason. The despair was still there, but it no longer consumed him entirely. One morning, while Jason was at his desk, reviewing the manuscript, Amelia found herself staring at the family photo on the wall. She hadn't noticed before how much it represented what she had lost. She had always been the reliable one, the one who had everything in control. But here she was, standing in front of her family's memories, unsure of where her life was headed. Ben had stopped calling. His silence was deafening. Amelia couldn't even bring herself to reach out to him. She didn't know what to say anymore. The realization hit her hard. She had neglected herself for so long in her pursuit of being the perfect sister, the perfect wife, that she had lost sight of who she truly was. Now, as Jason found his voice through writing, Amelia wondered if she could ever find hers. That morning, as Jason walked into the room, his eyes bright, his hands holding a freshly printed manuscript, Amelia felt a sense of pride that she hadn't felt in years. "I did it," Jason said, a small smile creeping onto his face. "It's done. The first draft is finished." Amelia's heart swelled with pride. For all the pain Jason had endured, this was a step forward, a sign that he was healing, even if just a little. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice steady. "This is a huge accomplishment." Jason sat down beside her, the manuscript resting between them. "I couldn't have done it without you, Amelia. You've been my rock." Amelia smiled softly, but deep down, she was wrestling with her own demons. "You're stronger than you think," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "You always have been." Jason's eyes softened as he looked at her. "What about you, Amelia? You're always taking care of everyone else, but who's taking care of you?" The question lingered in the air, the silence between them thick with meaning. Amelia didn't have an answer. She had spent so long tending to others that she didn't know what it meant to care for herself anymore. But in Jason's words, she found something she hadn't expected, a reminder that she, too, deserved care, love, and attention. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I think I've forgotten how to take care of myself." Jason placed a hand on hers, his grip firm but gentle. "It's never too late, you know. You've been carrying everyone else's weight. Maybe it's time to put that down, even for a little while." Amelia let out a slow breath, the weight of his words sinking in. Maybe he was right. Maybe she had been running on empty for too long. Jason's journey was far from over, but in that moment, Amelia realized that her own healing had to begin now. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. Later that day, she took a long walk along the beach. The wind was strong, but the ocean's rhythmic roar brought a sense of calm. For the first time, in a long time, she felt like she could breathe again. The rain had stopped, and for the first time, she saw the world around her with fresh eyes. She couldn't fix everything, not her marriage, not Jason's past, but maybe she didn't need to. Maybe the path forward wasn't about fixing everything, but learning to navigate the messiness of life. She had spent so long trying to control everything, to keep everyone else happy, that she had forgotten to live for herself. As Amelia walked back to the house, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Ben. "I think we need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat. Maybe this was the conversation they needed, the one that would finally allow them to understand where they stood. Maybe it was time to face the truth about her marriage, about herself, and about her future. But as she looked at the message, Amelia knew one thing for certain. She couldn't keep putting herself last. Whatever happened, she had to put her own well-being first. She wasn't just a caretaker, a fixer, or a support system. She was Amelia, and it was time to find out who that truly was. Amelia had spent the last few days in a daze, grappling with the whirlwind of emotions that had come flooding back after Ben's message. It had been a week since they last spoke, and every part of her wanted to avoid the conversation, to keep running from the reality of her fractured marriage. But deep down, she knew it was time to face the truth, no matter how painful it would be. Jason had been a lifeline for her, but now it was her turn to help herself. She had spent months being there for him, watching him navigate the storm of his own heartache, while silently burying her own. It was no longer sustainable. She couldn't keep ignoring the cracks in her own life, the disconnection with Ben, and the realization that she had lost sight of who she was in the process. Sitting in the living room, Jason was flipping through the pages of his manuscript, his fingers tracing the words as if he could feel them come to life. The room was quiet, save for the sound of the occasional turning of a page and the distant sound of the waves crashing against the shore. Amelia watched him from across the room, a quiet pride swelling in her chest. He was doing it. He was finding his way, piece by piece. Amelia had always believed in the power of words, in the way a story could heal even the deepest wounds. And now, as Jason poured his heart onto the pages, she realized that it was through this very act of vulnerability that they both would be able to heal her through his words, and he through her support. But now, the time had come to confront her own storm. The night Ben had sent his message, Amelia had waited. She had waited for the right moment, for the perfect words to come. But when the moment finally arrived, nothing was as simple as it had seemed. The evening was quiet, the house still. The only sound the rustling of the papers as Jason worked at his desk. Amelia sat on the edge of the couch, staring at her phone. She had told herself that if she didn't respond immediately, she could delay the inevitable. But that didn't make the truth any easier to swallow. Finally, she took a deep breath and typed back, "Let's talk." The text was short, simple, and to the point. She didn't have the answers. Not yet. But she knew this conversation was necessary. It wasn't just for Ben. It was for herself, too. She needed closure, clarity, and maybe even a chance to rebuild something, whether that something was her marriage or her own sense of peace. Later that evening, Ben arrived at the house, his presence like a heavy cloud in the room. Amelia had always loved how he could fill up a space, but tonight it felt different. The weight of what had been left unsaid between them hung in the air, palpable and oppressive. "Amelia," Ben said softly as he walked in, standing just inside the door. His eyes were tired, and there was a hesitation in his voice. "I'm sorry for not reaching out sooner. I've just been lost." Amelia nodded, feeling the lump in her throat grow. "I get it, Ben. I've been lost too. I've been so focused on fixing everything for everyone else that I didn't see how much I was losing myself." Ben looked down, his hand running through his hair. "I don't want to lose you, Amelia. I don't want us to fall apart." The sincerity in his voice hit Amelia hard. She had been so wrapped up in her own pain that she hadn't fully realized how much Ben was hurting too. She had neglected the very person who had once been her partner, the person who had stood beside her through everything. "I don't want to lose you either," she whispered, feeling the tears threaten to break free. "But I don't know how to fix what's been broken." There was a long silence as they both stood there, the weight of the past months pressing down on them. Finally, Ben spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can't fix everything, Amelia, but maybe we can try to rebuild." Amelia felt a glimmer of hope, but also a sense of fear. Could they really rebuild? Could they find their way back to the place they once were? She didn't know, but she was willing to try. For both of them. As the conversation continued, Amelia felt a shift. It wasn't an instant fix, and it certainly wasn't easy. But the cracks in their relationship began to reveal themselves, slowly and painfully. But they talked. For the first time in months, they communicated. They spoke openly about their fears, their frustrations, and their desires. It wasn't perfect. There were still things left unsaid, still emotions they hadn't fully processed. But it was a start. Later that night, after Ben had left, Amelia sat in the living room, her mind spinning. The conversation with Ben had been a breakthrough, but it didn't solve everything. There was still so much to work through, still so much to understand. Jason came down the stairs, rubbing his eyes as he saw her sitting in the dim light. He smiled softly at her, his eyes tired but content. "How did it go?" he asked. Amelia sighed, a deep, exhausted sigh, but there was a faint sense of relief in her voice. "It went better than I expected. There's still a lot to figure out, but we're talking." "That's something." Jason nodded. "That's a start. It's more than we had before." For the first time in a long time, Amelia realized that things didn't have to be perfect. They didn't have to follow the blueprint she had imagined. What mattered was that she was starting to heal, that she was starting to put herself first, to take care of herself and her own well-being. And that, in itself, was the beginning of rebuilding everything. It had been weeks since Amelia and Ben's difficult conversation, and though things weren't perfect, there was a subtle shift in the air. Their relationship was far from being mended, but they were learning to communicate, learning to make space for each other's feelings. It was a long process, one that required vulnerability, patience, and the willingness to confront truths they had been avoiding for months. Yet, despite the work ahead, Amelia felt a cautious sense of hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Jason, too, had continued to make progress. His manuscript was coming together, and he was beginning to think about what the next steps would be for him. He had always been a dreamer, but now he was turning that energy into something tangible. His writing, which had been a therapeutic outlet, was slowly evolving into something that could help others, a message of resilience, of rebuilding from the ashes of brokenness. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Jason looked up from his notebook and turned to Amelia. There was a quiet intensity in his eyes. "Amelia, I think I'm ready," he said, his voice steady, but the weight of his words was not lost on her. "Ready for what?" Amelia asked, her heart beating just a little faster. She had seen Jason struggle with the idea of sharing his story for months, but something in his demeanor told her that the moment had finally arrived. "To share it, to send the manuscript out, to put myself out there," Jason said, almost as if he were speaking more to himself than to her. "I've been hiding behind the words for so long, using them to protect myself from everything. But now, I think it's time for me to stop hiding." Amelia's heart swelled with pride. She knew how difficult this was for Jason, how vulnerable he had been in writing about his struggles and the betrayal he had faced. But she also knew that this was a crucial step for him, one that would help him heal even more, and possibly inspire others along the way. "You're ready, Jason," Amelia said, her voice full of conviction. "You've done the hard work. Now it's time to let the world see it, to let the world see you." Jason gave her a small, appreciative smile, and for a moment they just sat in silence, the weight of their conversation settling in the room. The rain outside had stopped, and for the first time in weeks the sky was clear. The stars were visible, their faint glow a reminder that even after the darkest nights, there was always light. Amelia sat back on the couch, her thoughts drifting to Ben. She had spent so much time caring for Jason, making sure he had the support he needed, but now it was time for her to take the same step. She needed to be honest with herself, to let go of the perfectionism that had held her back for so long. She needed to face the truth about her marriage, about her own needs, and about what she wanted for the future. It wasn't going to be easy. She and Ben had a lot of work to do, but they had started to communicate, and that was a step in the right direction. Amelia wasn't sure if their relationship could be repaired, but she knew that the process would take time, and she was willing to invest that time. She had to. For herself, for her marriage, and for her own healing. The next morning, Amelia woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. She had made a promise to herself to take the time she needed to rebuild her own life, to rediscover who she was outside of her roles as sister and wife. She had spent so long trying to meet everyone else's expectations that she had forgotten what it felt like to live for herself. But that was about to change. After breakfast, she sent a text to Ben, telling him that she was ready to talk again. The message wasn't easy to send, but it felt right. She couldn't keep avoiding the conversation. It was time to confront the hard truths, to talk about what had been broken and how, if possible, they could start to rebuild. As the day went on, Amelia found herself spending more time reflecting on her life. The small moments, the ones she had taken for granted, began to hold more meaning. She was learning to savor the quiet, to listen to her own needs, and to care for herself in ways she hadn't done before. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but it was a start. That evening, as she sat on the porch watching the sunset with Jason, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Jason was doing the work of healing, and so was she. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was progress. "Do you think everything will be okay?" Jason asked softly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I don't know," Amelia admitted, her voice thoughtful. "But I think we'll figure it out. We have to." Jason nodded, and they sat together in silence, both of them taking in the view before them. For the first time in months, Amelia felt the weight of her fears start to lift. The storm had passed, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, she knew she wasn't walking it alone.